mentioned during the sermon on Sunday that I was trying to avoid some of the interpretive stuff, the terminology that gets at, the lens that I use or different people use to view the book of Revelation. Not because it doesn't matter, but because in a sermon time I want to focus on God. That's why we call this Seeing Jesus. Revelation Seeing Jesus is the name of the sermon series. I want to focus on what God is doing, who God is in a sermon. That's my primary job, is to show people Jesus. Sometimes that interpretive stuff becomes very important to understand what's going on in a certain vision in the book of Revelation, but it's not always important. So I got asked after the service if I could use this platform, the longer ending, to get at some of the interpretive stuff. And I think it's a fantastic idea, so that's what I'm going to do. So one of the first things we need to do when we start talking about our interpretive lens, what interpretive lens are we going to use to understand the visions, the prophetic visions in Revelation? Well, we need to understand how we see biblical prophecy. And there are four and a half. I fall in that half, so I'm going to call it 5 because we want our credit. 5 major camps of prophetic interpretation. Okay, and of course there's wiggle room in these. Anytime people get assigned a label, they just immediately reject it, right? They find the reason to be unique, typically. So the first is the idealist. So the idealist doesn't see prophecy as grounded in history. So specifically coming to the book of Revelation, the idealist says Revelation is about the struggle between evil and God, and how evil has tried again and again to thwart the plans of God and failed. Right? It's this God versus the powers of evil story through successive visions, with God always being the victor. So that's the idealist. It has nothing really to do with historical events at all. It's just allegory. It's one big allegory. That's the idealist. Then you've got the preterist. The preterist says, yes, biblical prophecy is grounded in history, but there's nothing prophesied in the Bible that hasn't already come to pass. Typically, the preterist will say, except Revelation 21 and 22 is a picture of heaven, and that's future. But preterism is usually rejected. Full preterism is rejected because the preterist would then say, all that's prophesied about the second coming of Christ occurred in 70 AD at the destruction of Jerusalem. That was Christ came again in 70 AD. And the rest of us are just going on after this. My assumption would be that the preterist still says heaven, is our home, but we're not waiting for a second. We're not waiting for the second coming. The second coming was prophesied about and came to pass. Came to pass because every prophecy in Scripture has come to pass by 70 AD. Bunch of problems with that. They cannot say the creeds with us, and so are often called heretics. They also have a problem understanding when you say the book of Revelation was written in 95 AD, if the stuff prophesied in it was supposed to come to pass 70 AD, well, they've got to shove the writing in that book earlier somehow, or say that it was written retroactively to explain the events, in which case it's not prophecy. So that's the full preterist. Then there's a partial preterist. This guy, N.R.C. Sproul. Partial preterism says some or even many of the events prophesied in Scripture have come to pass. And I would argue that we should even first look to history for the fulfillment of those prophecies. Not make an initial assumption that the prophecy is for me or for a future time. That my initial assumption would be the original audience perhaps saw this prophecy come to pass. But it's called partial preterism for a reason, because we would say that's not the story in all cases. There are many Old Testament passages, and most of Revelation is future. We haven't seen a great tribulation. We haven't seen the last of the Antichrist. We haven't seen the second coming, of course, right? And so there's plenty of things that still have to happen in the future. Now that is over and against the futurist, who would say all of the events beginning in Revelation chapter 4 are future. Now, I've already argued in the sermon series that Revelation 4 and 5 is a picture of, what's going on in heaven when Jesus defeats death on the cross, and it's a big part of my interpretive lens of the rest of the book that this is a story that's retelling the victory of Christ to ground its future prophecies. But the futurist says, no, starting at 4 and 5, it's all future. And again, wiggle room. They have a good argument. At the beginning of chapter 4, John says, I saw a door open in heaven. And he said, come up here. And he said, I will show you what must soon take place. Well, that means future, right? And so he sees the lamb looking as though he had been slain. That's future. So there's an argument to be made for the futurist, and that's not me. And finally, there's the historicist. The historicist says that all of the book of Revelation is explaining the progression of Christian history from that point on. And so it's, I guess, similar to partial preterism in the sense that some of it has come to pass and some of it is future. But more than that, it's a bit more linear to the historicist. I argued this Sunday that Revelation is a book of cyclical visions, retelling the same story. And in some sense, that makes me sound like an idealist, right? But again, wiggle room. The historicist says Revelation was telling of these end times in which we're living, and we fall somewhere in this linear progression of the way the story is being told through these visions. So those are the 5 major lenses through which we view prophecy in the Bible, but for our purposes in this series in Revelation. The idealist, who says it's all just an allegory for God triumphing over evil. The preterist, who says all of this stuff was for the initial hearers. It has all passed. None of it is for us, other than what we can glean about God's character or how he deals with his people. The partial preterist, who says much of this may have been in the past, but certainly some of it is still to come in the future. The historicist, who says this is a linear progression of how God is unfolding his plan in history, and we find ourselves somewhere in it. Or the futurist, who says all of this comes when the end times come. And like I said, just about everyone would probably reject one of those terms, right? Because there's wiggle room everywhere. But those are the different lenses, and I'm a partial preterist.